Okay, everyone. Well, thanks for joining. My name is Ed Higgins. I'm part of Spyglass, which is Catapult security and compliance practice. Um, Today, we're going to visit on remote workforce, um, the security aspects of that, and maybe some of the impact that COVID's had, mostly negative, but there were some milestones that we achieved. So let's jump into them, and then I want to kind of set the stage for, how we raced to a remote work environment. We kind of all get that, but then what are some things that you can think about um, to secure the newly remote workforce? That's your employees. That's us all working from home. So let's jump in and we'll touch on what we're going to cover in this session. What is whoops, what is common for some is now the new norm to others. Some businesses um, always had a remote work aspect. They may be distributed all over the globe, and that was their only way to collaborate. Other businesses were more traditional in the sense that the face-to-face meetings, the interactions in the office, were the way business was done, and the world changed. So we'll touch on some of the whys and maybe some of the things that happened with COVID. Then how are the bad guys kind of targeting us as people? Some of the most common areas. There's a lot of them, but we'll focus on a few of the top ones. And then what are some tips for securing your remote users, your employees, essentially? And I don't want to sound like there isn't, there's critical workers in hospitals and things like that. I'm more talking about those in the commercial business space that have had to survive by moving remote. That's what I'm focusing on. And then, when we secure people, how do we actually enhance their work experience at the same time? And then we'll touch on some questions. So I know the cover of the slide said 5 tips. There will be a few more, and maybe call those last few bonuses. So let's jump right in. Um, COVID came around and caused the world to change. Thank you, Ed, for that insightful bit of information. But it caused enterprises to think very, very quickly on how they do business. How can they survive basically a global shutdown? Interestingly enough, a U.S. Census, a global workplace analytics portion of them, did some analysis on how many people actually work remote. And prior to COVID, this came out, and it was 3.6% worked half the time or more from a home or a remote office scenario. That's a real interesting stat. COVID kind of shot that number way up. It's actually still increasing, although we're 7-8 months into, the pandemic and the shutdown. That sets a stage for a 7-month deployment of remote home strategies. There's not a whole lot positive about COVID, but one thing from a business standpoint is, we find a way to make things happen as a society. And, businesses rallied to put folks that were not normally used to working from home in that scenario very quickly. So, change the world. You're going to see some things here that kind of walk us through, the how, the why, and what tools to leverage. So this transition created not just work from home, but it brought with it things like privacy and compliance and security. Are we protecting our data? Are we preserving the privacy of things that we hold in our corporate networks? Do we fall out of compliance by moving people to a home office situation? So this is where we now jump into the layout, the challenges. Everyone's working from home and sometimes from their home computers. Sensitive organizational data now can get put on that home computer or maybe outside of the corporate network. Employees are accessing the network maybe in an insecure manner, and not just maybe. When we do our assessment work, our meeting new customers for the first time, we often find that there's some room for improvement on how employees all over the world now are accessing corporate data. And then, our employees using things that aren't like vetted, aren't vetted tools. And this is not a bash of tools, but, Slack and Zoom and Skype and Teams, those are all means to collaborate from a remote standpoint. We're going to focus on the Teams element, and we'd be remiss if we didn't say that the uniformity, the security, the things that are important and vetted are among those. But it wasn't the case when people worked from a home scenario. There was a lot of things you may have even read in the news. Certain schools jumped to leveraging one form of social collaboration, and it was easy to hijack that. It was easy to put things that you don't want to have happen in any setting. So there's that, and then we're doing things differently, and that always, anytime you have that kind of chaos, there's always an opening for an attack, and they've increased. Targeted phishing, spear phishing, email compromises, spoofing email messages from the CIO or the CFO to the accounts payable person to say, "Hey, I'm out of the office, as you know, send a wire transfer to this bank, blah blah blah." And we've seen that as a society. We've seen a lot of those scams take place, and they're rampant. So let's jump into that and talk about how the bad guys, the hackers, not just hackers, but bad actors, are profiting off remote workers. So the industry as a whole noticed, larger than normal campaigns around phishing. Think about remote access. So, there are some protocols that have vulnerabilities in them, remote desktop protocol. If you don't configure that properly, it can open you up to, a lot of exposures with both vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, and the bad guys are attacking that. And certainly malware and ransomware have been pretty big things. A huge health system this last weekend is going through that very thing right now. Some of the common lures, the phishing lures that are being put out there, information about vaccines, masks, targeting people from their innocence to understand. They click the link, you can see the list: financial scams, government assistance scams. We've seen a lot of that as a society here in the States. And then downloads, click here to download this. And even some applications that have been introduced to the market have blatant malware built into them. And so the bad actors are tapping into these things. From a remote desktop protocol, that's a protocol that's been out there allowing, say, IT the convenience of connecting to a server or a system. That's that second bullet. When you don't look at it to configure it and tighten it down, there are some vulnerabilities in it. And there's a link in this, and I'm sure you will get the presentation. But here's a link to a Catapult blog. About a year ago, we wrote a blog on, there were 7 or 8 steps that you can take to harden. So if you leverage remote desktop protocol, predominantly for your IT folks to be able to manage systems that may be on-prem, in Azure, wherever they exist, take a look at that, because it'll give you some details about, specifically about remote desktop protocol. Data is the reason IT exists. I know how blatant that sounds, but the reason we have identity management is to validate we are who we say we are, so we can get to an application, a file share, a product. But the result is we're going to data. We're getting to data. So measured from 2016 to 2019, you see all the color bars on the right, and I apologize, it's a little fuzzy. But there were predictions made back in January and February when COVID was starting to come about, if you will, that data, and that's in the middle of that graph, that red spike that shoots way over. It's almost a 4x prediction on data loss and threats to confidential information. That's the key insightful thing that I think that graph shows. But it's because we're accessing data around the clock from any device, everywhere, from home computers and work computers alike, and the potential for carelessness, lack of protections exist in many organizations for data that traverses to that home desktop disk drive. What do you do about that? Lack of protections to distinguish between what is allowed by corporate, and disallowed applications. So those things impact data, which is the keys to the kingdom. We want to protect that, whether it's personally identifiable information or whether it's your intellectual property, your business differentiation. So it's a real important topic. Nothing really new there, other than the attacks on data have increased dramatically. And even though that was a prediction in the graph, the actual activity has been carrying out true to prediction. So employees new to the remote work scene, everyone raced, we get that, to a work from home situation. Employers had to figure out how do we provision that? Do we give people company-owned laptops? Do we set up virtual desktop, virtual private networking, remote desktop? What are the ways that we can do this now? And they did it with all of the above. Are there better ways? Can we do better? Yes, there is. And yes, we can. So where this kind of segues into is in David Totter's presentation, our keynote, the Microsoft 365 environment provides all these things: collaboration, workflow, content, data protection, privacy, mobility from anywhere on any device, anytime, and security and compliance, where just by working from home doesn't compromise your security or your compliance. And so that's the essence of let's drill into that. So tip number one, many of you here are already entrenched in some form of Microsoft. There was a presentation, Joe Custer, my colleague, just did one earlier on tools you already own that may not be taken advantage of. Take advantage of them. By doing that, you're actually employing basic concepts of what we call zero trust. The data used to be the foundation, or even further back than that, the network was the security, and those things are the foundation is the identity. Those are the base of who you are, what rights do you have, and then the network, then the device, then the application, and then the data. So you have to treat all of those things, but leverage concepts of zero trust. There's a lot of great information out in the internet on zero trust concepts. It doesn't have to be an overburdening process. You can take things, bits and pieces, and apply them to your business, but look into zero trust. The Microsoft M365 environment, Office 365, is designed to support zero trust. Maybe not right out of the box, but a little bit of configuration and a little bit of tuning and a little bit of optimization around your unique business. Who are the users? How do you get into that data? How do you classify your data? Basic stuff, and then apply those tools allows you to kind of move into that concept of zero trust, which means instead of trust but verify, it's verify then trust. Think of it that way. So putting it into correlation of like these tools, this might be a handy quick reference to some, and some it may be you already know that, but this puts into context the unified stack. The beauty of this stack is it works seamlessly with one another. The identity, who am I? What rights do I have? What rights are assigned to data that allow me to even see that data because of the rights that I have? You see on the two ends of the circle, you've got all those controls. So all the way through this list, we can manage these 5 core elements um, of uniformity. And as I kind of jump through this, you'll kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about in uniformity. So hold that thought and let's kind of go through this. Tip number 2. So tip number 1 was apply zero trust concepts. Use the tools that you already own, optimize them, etc. Multi-factor is almost table stakes anymore. Many environments apply multi-factor to just their administrative group because we don't want to impact the end user. We've got a business to run. Well, when you break the business by breaking into an account and stealing data, that doesn't do any good either. So there's that balance of security versus productivity. David Totter also said that's a fine balancing act. Multi-factor can be made extremely proficient and easy on your end user community by leveraging what's called conditional access. Conditional access is something we'll kind of show through this, but multi-factor, I log in with my username and password, perhaps a biometric, perhaps that app that's on our phone that says allow that connection and it validates you are who you say you are. A lot more detail on that throughout the day because multi-factor is going to be a common theme through this whole summit. Self-service, when it's tip number 3. It aids your help desks in being able to do routine tasks like reset a user. It's not uncommon that a user account could get compromised. That happens. But the tools that are at your disposal can detect that and actually close the user out of their session, lock them out, force a password reset. Well, you need a self-service tool to be able to re-provision that user's ID, go through the steps to say I am who I say I am, and then of course get my access turned on again. 30% of call tickets are associated with password reset. You could kind of automate all of that. And then, with respect to teams, which is another huge element, group membership, delegation, approvals, workflows, things like that about joining and collaborating in work teams, using teams, that's another element of self-service to take advantage of. And, as I mentioned earlier, protecting your priv users, your administrative users, is most people have some form of that. We've actually seen some opportunities to improve that from the consulting we do with our existing customers and new clients. But you want to protect privileged user. That is, grant least privilege to the least privilege required to do the job. That is, that is the element of least priv or least privilege. A regular user named ed.higgins can request through privileged identity management an elevation in my privilege to get administrative access to do the job that I have as an administrator. And when I complete that task, it can revoke that and bring me back down to a regular user credential. That is a powerful function because when you take away priv user from everyone, it's not permanent, it's as needed. Then if something bad happens where a user account is compromised, I don't know, 85, 90% of all attacks that happen on user accounts, they're not just to go in and look at Ed, the regular user. They're designed to go do something else as a foothold, a gateway. That is what we call lateral movement, the attack kill chain, we often refer to it as. And so when you have a user account that's compromised, bad actors will use that to identify who are the admins. Well, let me go try to brute force their account, take over that. And then once that bad actor gets admin, then they do the damage. That could be stealing your data. That could be introducing malware to lock down your environment for a ransom, all sorts of bad stuff. So it's highly recommended, not just multi-factor on your priv users, but take away global admin from those that don't need it and put in a privileged identity management component of your environment to ask for admin, grant the admin, let the admin do their job, and then when they're finished with the session or on a time box or any of those rules that are easy to set up, disable their admin access and bring them back down to a regular user. That's actually a really strong suggestion for protecting your priv accounts. The fifth one really gets into that device management, where multi-factor is one form, but if I were to have my Android phone and my Surface laptop enrolled in device management, there are protections that can be laid out. I'm going to keep this at a high level. This is a kind of a business-oriented conversation. But if I have device management in place with all the controls that protect the individual's privacy on my phone, because those things exist and can be implemented pretty, I won't say quickly, but with some thought, they can be quickly done. Then that device becomes part of the factor in what's called conditional access. If Ed's device, if Ed's Android is enrolled in, say, Intune device management, and I'm compliant, it's a compliant device. It uses the apps that my company has said are, legit, and it keeps those things in the box on that phone. Then maybe I don't need to get a multi-factor ping every single time I access something. So there are ways to improve user experience by employing conditional access concepts. There's a lot of great topic on that. Catapult does an awful lot with customers on helping them optimize and configure and even build from scratch great conditional access rules that really improve user experience, allow you to put multi-factor and those advanced protections on all your employee base, and then ultimately safeguard your data, your corporate access, while at the same time improving user experience again. So a quick walkthrough on a scenario, accessing an HR file on SharePoint, which is in this case on-prem. So we kind of cobbled it up with an Apple iPad. So I'm enrolled in Intune with the device. I've containerized, I'm managing a browser. I have a single sign-on, device policies, and the security controls that you want to have about the experience of that device connecting to the network. Goes through application, what are those conditions met where the device is managed? Has the user authenticated? Risk-based authentication. Has the account been compromised? That we don't know about is the username and password credentials being sold in the darknet, which happens. Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection and the analytics to that for compromised account detection allow us to run through that gate to move us to the next level. The user and device, the behavior. Is there any intrusions on that device? Nope. Then let's go through the phase of information protection. Now, that is separate of the user, but it associates identity with the data that I'm allowed to see. So when I authenticate as a registered user, my device is compliant, all that is good. Now I get to the side of I open up a spreadsheet. And if in the case of HR, maybe that spreadsheet is the social security number file for benefits. or something like that. So if I've met all those other gates, then information protection is saying that data had Social Security numbers in it, and information protection, or what is now Azure Information Protection, is actually Microsoft Information Protection from just a naming convention. But AIP will can automatically protect that data, so that if it detects something with credit cards, Social Security, your unique intellectual property, strings of data that make it unique, then let's automatically encrypt that. And if the user has access to that, that data, or if they're allowed to see that data, then let's allow them to open the document. Otherwise, it's encrypted. So you've got even more granular control. And then to close out the loop, everything about the access and the experience of the device connecting with the network to the data is logged and stored and captured in a mutable manner. That's kind of an important correlation in the sea of things. And you just take that and put it in a life cycle and repeat it for every time someone accesses data. A little bit, busy, but it's the tools. Getting back to my original point, the unified experience, the stack works together to do all these things, and you should exploit that. You should leverage that capability. So tools that support data and identity governance. So that's kind of tip 6. It has a few parts in it, but information protection, your written data classification policy, that sets the stage. Defining the controls, like is it a spreadsheet with Social Security numbers? Is it automatically set as a restricted data? If your written policy may say anything that has that type of data, we call it restricted, not just confidential, but another level. I'd say when you do your classifications, keep them simple. It's real easy to get carried away and have 15, 16 levels of data classification, and people get confused with I don't know whether to pick this or that. So the best practice is to keep it simple. And usually companies, corporations' written policy have 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 data classifications. Take that, apply it into your Azure Information Protection or your Microsoft Information Protection plan, and design your controls to match that. That allows email, files, and applications that have these data in them. When we step through that, that is stuff that's shared internally. That is stuff that's shared with business-to-business relationships externally, and then business to customer or B2C externally. These controls that you define at the top can carry forward and keep those protections in place, even when data goes to third parties. That allows that protection to be felt on any device, anywhere in the world. A key example is if I put controls on a sensitive spreadsheet, again, let's use that example, and I say I don't want this to go outside of mine and their domain. If it was copied to Box or Dropbox or some place, the content would be encrypted. There's no way to open it. You authenticate to that file, if you will. And when you do that, then you're allowed to see it if you're allowed to see it. And if I revoke access for, say, an employee leaves the company and I terminate their access in the system, then once that happens, it's instantaneous that the user won't be able to open up that document as it goes to Dropbox or Gmail or wherever it lands. So there's a lot of different controls that you can leverage to your advantage to protect that data. DLP, when I authenticate with my phone and have my apps on my iPad and I open an email, you can set controls to say, allow that Excel spreadsheet to be copied, but never go out to a personal app. Even copy and paste. Same thing with like a Word doc. Allow content to be pasted, but let's not let them save to a personal storage wherever. And then another facet is, say, OneDrive. Allow it only to be saved to OneDrive or the corporate repository. This concept of DLP, data loss prevention, allows you to cascade these across all your apps, all your environment, email or SharePoint or Teams. These play hand in hand. Again, it speaks to the unified stack aspects. Intellectual property, we have the Death Star design. And you'll see where the circle is by having, classification built into my environment. I have a banner that I, as a user, can say, I can designate that or automate the designation of that as a specific form of classification, just a kind of picture of what you can do. You can protect the same approach to protecting sensitive info in email. One, classify your data. This is an example of an email. I put a faked social security number in there and put a box down at the bottom. The system picks up on the fact that, oh, this has data classification. That top bar shows me things I can do. That's always there, but I can try to change the classification, and your rules can say don't allow the change of classification. This thing is always going to be protected as restricted or confidential, whatever your strategy is, because it has this data in it. You can put tooltips that the minute the system sees that this number that looks like a social security numbers or an international national ID number, whatever your vantage point is, that sensitive data can be defined to pop a tooltip to say, hey, this is not good to put this in an email. Credit cards, same thing. And then actions can be triggered based on the content and classification. So that's the automation aspect. This email is not going to go out. If I hit send, it won't go. It can't go. In one sense, you may allow that. Your business may require that sensitive data sharing. You can configure it that way. So there's a lot of agility with how you can set up to protect sensitive info and continue to say yes to the business, which is it's a CIO term. I don't want to be the office of no. I want to help the business perform, especially now with the chaos of having everyone work remote and keep our revenue going, all of that stuff. We want to say yes more, and this enables that, but in a secure manner. So this one is, maybe it's a tip, maybe it's more of a handout. We leverage these kind of things in our employee awareness campaigns. This could be a poster. You can circulate this very thing to help your employees spot the flags, the red flags in an email. Where should I look to see what things are? So this gives you a kind of a sense. You may have already seen other similar types of activity, but I thought I would share it because that phishing surface is at least 80% of the attack surface that bad actors, every bad situation has started, let's not say every, because there are others, many of a bad situation, whether it be ransomware or malicious actor or someone getting into our environment, happens a lot of times with the first thing being a phishing mail. Click the link and there you go. So it's really important to be able to help our employees, help our frontline workers see what good or bad looks like and be able to distinguish that type of language that's used in emails and unfamiliarity. If there's attachments that you don't even know where it's coming from, those are things to be skeptical of. So I'm going to downsize this screen so I can see if there's any questions. Whoops. And see if I can field some questions from the folks here. Yes. So one of the questions is, do we recommend supplementing Defender ATP tools with something like a Crowdstrike sensor for end user devices or servers? That becomes a decision point. We've tested and we've leveraged things like Microsoft Defender ATP and information protection, Defender information protection out at the endpoint, and those are comparable competitors, if you will. Defense in depth is one strategy, and I'm not here to say one tool is less or equal to another, but I would say that in your M365, your Office 365 environment, the tools that I just showed you are all on the cloud, all on the experience, identity, data, device, application, and access. How are people getting into your tenant? So it's not about the endpoint. You make an assumption that you've got Windows 10. Is it in device management? Well, that's one good step. Does that device management say Intune? Does that force the updates of deploying Defender ATP, Microsoft Defender ATP, and the like, or does it incorporate your use of a CrowdStrike? I would say you always want to supplement your access, which is the endpoint, with a tool, and it could very well be Microsoft Defender ATP. It actually does a very good job, and there's a correlation to that. So when you have Defender ATP working and operating, then you actually can leverage Sentinel to automate remediations of things. So Azure Sentinels, yet another great feature that's part of what you own today, that you can light that up. It automatically consumes the signals from your tenant. All that stuff I talked about consumes all of those signals. And then Defender ATP or Microsoft Defender ATP out the endpoint can provide that information, that signal, that threat hunting aspect to correlate things back down to the endpoint. I touched on the cloud side of things, but it's a great point, and you always want to layer a security. And I'd strongly suggest looking at a Defender ATP to complement what you're asking. Do we have any other questions? No, let me put this back up so my mug is not on the screen full time.
There was one other one.
Oh.
There was one from Jessica Phillips.
Jessica Phillips.
To what extent?
Thank you very much. Remote workspaces in Azure. Actually, great question. So none. If you have your email in Office 365 and you have your Teams environment, your OneDrive, your SharePoint, you're already set up to layer these security, and maybe some of these might be considered advanced, E5, E3, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to set up workspaces in Azure specifically. This is all around M365 or Office 365. These tools can operate in there, and when you deploy them in your Azure AD and your advanced threat protection and your information protection elements, they can carry over to those workplaces that you may construct in Azure as a second cloud, if you will. Often Azure is associated with databases, PaaS, IaaS, infrastructure, virtual machine environments. You definitely want protections to apply to there, but the stuff from your M365 environment can carry over into your Azure environment. But there's what I talked about here today. There's no prerequisite that you have to do everything in do everything in two places. What I talked about, you can self-contain within your M365. And truth be told, Azure AD is in Azure. It carries across all the top. So there's a lot of again, unification, benefit to the Microsoft's investment in security and the three clouds. So I hope that answers your question. Were there any other Any other questions we need to field?
I didn't see any others.
Great. Well, let me put this back up because we're right at time and I want to make sure you get your prize. So, you know, we want to know how we did. It's good feedback for me as a practitioner to know, did I hit the right marks? Did I give you some insight? And how this whole session went. So in return for that, we're going to enroll you in a raffle. So click on that QR code, complete that survey, let us know how we did, and you're automatically enrolled for a super awesome fancy gift card. Notice my little picture of the gift there. And then takeaways. One of the things that's been super helpful to Catapult and its customers in knowing where to work, how to optimize, how to discover what's going on, good, bad, and different. And then even another set of eyes is our 365 assessment. We do a similar assessment in Azure, so we just say security assessment, but let's get together. Tell us a little bit about your environment. You know, are you in Office 365, Azure, both? We can structure an assessment that allows the identification of everything that's going on. All of those tools I just talked about, we light them all up and we review what's going on, the behaviors, the bad actors. We discover an awful lot of things and insight to bring you. So there's a link there to grabbing a one-pager on our assessment. And then further, there's an ebook available, the link at the very bottom. I wish I'd have put the link, but when we get to this deck, and there, you'll see them, and I think maybe Samantha might have pasted it in, but you can download a free ebook on securing your remote workforce just for free. So you can click on that. And with that, at time, a little past time, I wanted to thank you for letting me also, like David Totter said, put on a code and present to you today.